I realized too late that love can rot quietly, the way flowers die in a sealed room, beautiful until you touch them. 3 years with her, and I thought I'd memorized every version of her heartbeat. But the night I returned from my business trip, carrying a truth sharp enough to skin me alive, I saw it, the fear in her eyes. Not of losing me, but of losing everything she'd built on my name. People say heartbreak makes you fragile. But mine made me precise. Because the marriage certificate in my bag wasn't for her. It was for the woman she tried to erase. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the apartment wasn't the stillness. It was the absence of her. 3 years together, and she had always greeted me with something. Footsteps, arms around my shoulders, the faint scent of jasmine as she pulled me close. But that evening, the air held only the echo of what used to be. The apartment looked the same as when I had left 6 days ago, but it felt rearranged. Like someone had polished the surface while letting the rot spread underneath. A candle still burned on the kitchen counter, but the flame was short, dying, trembling, like it had been neglected for hours. I placed my luggage quietly by the door. The wheels scraped the floor, soft but sharp enough to slice through the silence. Then I heard it. A click. The unmistakable sound of a phone screen being locked. She appeared from the hallway as if pulled by a string she didn't control. Her long hair was hurriedly pushed behind her ears, her lips glistened unnaturally, like she had just reapplied gloss without checking a mirror. "Oh," she breathed, stiffening. "You came back early." "Not I missed you. Not your home. Just surprise." And underneath it, something that tasted like fear. She held her phone against her thigh, almost pressed to the fabric of her skirt, as if the device itself had become incriminating. A tiny red notification light blinked against her palm. Her fingers twitched, wanting to hide it completely. "I caught an earlier flight," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine, it carried the metallic edge of someone who already knew too much. Someone who had seen screenshots of messages, heard whispered confessions, and watched her love flatten into something performative. But she didn't know that yet. She didn't know that the man who left 6 days ago, the man who worshipped her, trusted her, would have bled for her, had died somewhere between my departure gate and the truth. She tilted her head, forcing a smile that curved like a cracked mirror. "Oh? You should have told me. I would have prepared something." Prepared something. Like affection was a meal she needed time to cook. Like love had to be staged, lit properly, rehearsed. My chest tightened. I didn't think I had to announce when I'd come home. Her gaze darted away, landing on anything, everything, except me. The framed painting she once said she adored. The window reflecting a city soaked in fading sunlight. The rug she insisted we buy together to make the apartment feel like ours. But nothing felt like ours anymore. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind couples sometimes hold. This silence was swollen, poisonous, thick enough to choke on. I felt it sitting in my lungs, pressing against my ribs, daring me to breathe. She moved first. Not toward me, but toward the kitchen counter, intentionally placing distance between us. "You must be tired," she said softly. "Should I make tea?" Tea. She always offered tea when she didn't know what else to say. When guilt needed to be diluted. "No," I replied. The word cut through the space like a blade drawn in moonlight. Her shoulders stiffened. "Did something happen? You look different." Different. Yes, I supposed I did. Because on the flight home, I had replayed every moment of the past 3 years, every kiss, every promise, every night I believed she was mine, and found threads of insincerity tangled through them. I didn't confront her yet. Not because I feared the truth, but because watching her attempt to maintain her facade was the closest thing to justice I'd ever receive. "I'm fine," I said, though the lie tasted bitter. "Just tired." A tiny exhale left her lips. I wondered if she mistook my restraint for ignorance. If she believed that as long as she smiled, as long as she pretended, I would stay blind. Her phone buzzed. Her entire body flinched. It was so small, so quick, an involuntary tightening of her fingers, a microscopic widening of her eyes, but I saw it. After loving her for so long, I could read her down to the shift of a breath. "Spam," she muttered, not even checking the screen. But she refused to place the phone on the table. She kept it in her palm like it contained her oxygen. I stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough for her to feel the gravity change between us. She looked up. And for the first time in months, I didn't see love in her eyes. I saw worry. Calculating. Mechanical. As if her emotions were gears she had to manually crank into place. "What's wrong?" she asked again, voice softer, threads of sweetness stitched too neatly. A sweetness that belonged to a woman who never expected to be caught. Nothing, I whispered. But the floor beneath us creaked, the sound of something giving way. Something she'd spent years balancing. What did you do while I was gone? I asked casually. Her throat bobbed. Just worked. Met with friends. You know my routine. Yes, I murmured. I know it very well. Her breath hitched. She smiled again, too quickly, too brightly. Like she was dragging the corners of her mouth upward with invisible hooks. Are you sure you're okay? She said. You seem distant. The irony almost made me laugh. Distant? She had been drifting away for months, a slow, practiced fade-out. She just assumed I wouldn't notice because she had grown comfortable with the idea of me as hers. Predictable. Stationary. Unquestioning. But distance isn't always measured in miles. Sometimes it's measured in the empty warmth of a partner's hug. Sometimes it's in the gap between a truth and the lie pretending to replace it. And sometimes distance is a 6-day trip during which another woman, someone gentle, someone unafraid of sincerity, tells you the truth you should have known all along. The truth that the person waiting for you at home has never loved you the way you loved her. I leaned against the counter. Her perfume, vanilla and something floral, barely reached me. She used to drown herself in it, wanting me to comment every time. Now she wore it lightly, like she had applied it for someone else's attention entirely. Why are you looking at me like that? She whispered. Like what? Like you see through me. I held her gaze. I didn't blink. I've always seen you, I said quietly. I just didn't know what I was looking at. Her lips parted, but no words escaped. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit. Her eyes flicked to the door, as if calculating whether she could run from a conversation that hadn't even begun. I noticed the faint smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth. Someone else's kiss? Or her own rushed attempt to look composed before facing me? I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I stared at her phone, still trembling with the ghost of a recent notification. A storm contained in a small rectangle of glass. Is there something you want to tell me? I asked. Her jaw clenched. A muscle twitched dangerously. No, she said, too fast. Why would you even? The phone buzzed again. This time, she froze completely. Not a blink. Not a breath. Her lie was no longer in her words. It was in her silence. And in that exact second. That thin, fragile pause where the truth pressed against the seam of her composure. I felt something inside me break. The shattering wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, internal crack. Like a small fracture forming in a foundation you thought was indestructible. Say something, she pleaded, her voice trembling now. I did, I murmured. You just weren't listening. She swallowed. Please don't be like this. I didn't do anything wrong. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked toward the phone again. A reflex she couldn't suppress. I stepped forward slowly, watching her shrink into herself. Not because I raised my voice. Not because I accused her. But because she knew. Deep in the part of her heart where guilt grows like mold. That the man standing before her had come home with a different kind of silence. A silence strong enough to expose every lie she ever told. You came back early, she repeated, voice thin and trembling. Yes, I said. Early enough to see things clearly. And as her face drained of color. As her fingers tightened around the phone like it was a lifeline that might betray her at any second. I realized something. She never expected me to return as a man who had finally stopped loving her illusions. She never expected me to survive outside the world she built around me. She never expected me to come home with truth in my hands. But I had. And it was only the beginning of her unraveling. Before everything collapsed, before love thinned into something pale and unrecognizable, there had been another woman in my life. Not a lover. Not a secret. Just a quiet warmth I never stopped carrying with me, even when I tried. Her name used to feel like sunlight on my tongue. Soft. Bright. Unmistakably honest. But my girlfriend, my ex, though I didn't yet use the word, had despised her from the beginning. She didn't know her face, her voice, or the way she laughed with her entire body. But she despised her anyway, as if the mere memory of that woman threatened the kingdom of illusion she was building around me. She's irrelevant, my girlfriend had said once, casually, while scrolling through her phone. A distraction. A phase you're embarrassed to admit you went through. Her words didn't hurt then. Not because they were wrong. But because I believed she loved me enough to protect whatever mattered to me. I didn't know her love was a coin she spent only on herself. The woman she tried to erase from my life, let me call her Elara for now, though even that feels too small for who she truly is, stood by me during my so-called business trip. A trip I didn't take for work. A trip I took because the truth had finally grown too loud to ignore. I remember the day I left. The sky was bruised with early morning rain, clouds hanging low like they, too, were exhausted by pretending. My suitcase rolled quietly behind me, but inside, my heart felt heavier than anything I packed. My girlfriend had kissed me at the door. A kiss without weight, without warmth, without the tiny tremor of affection that used to hide in her lips. She didn't even walk me to the elevator. She just waved absent-mindedly and said, "Text when you land." But as I descended floor by floor, the elevator filled with a suffocating realization. She didn't care where I was going. She cared only that I was gone. Elara met me at the small cafe near the station, a place with fogged windows, chipped mugs, and old paintings of the sea hung crookedly along the walls. The air smelled of cinnamon and quietness. She looked up from her book the moment I entered, and the way her face brightened, gently, without surprise, without pretense, felt like a balm on skin I hadn't realized was burning. "You came," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly would break something delicate between us. I sat across from her. Rain tapped against the window beside us. Every drop felt like a truth trying to be heard. "I had to," I said. "I think something's wrong." She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer empty reassurance. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, slowly, carefully, as if giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Her hand was warm. Earthy. Real. "Tell me," she said. And so I did. I told her about the distance in my relationship, the cracks I kept pretending were shadows, the growing ache in my chest every time my girlfriend looked at me without truly seeing me. I told her about the emptiness disguised as routine. About how my love had become something ornamental to her, something she displayed rather than held. Elara listened with the patience of someone who had once known my heart and still respected its fragility. When I finished, she exhaled softly. "You already know the answer," she murmured. "But you're scared to say it." I looked down at our hands, hers steady, mine trembling. "She isn't who you think she is," Elara said quietly. "And I don't think she wants you to know who you are, either." Those words lodged themselves somewhere deep inside me, like a seed waiting for the right moment to shatter open. Later that afternoon, after we left the cafe, I found the message that changed everything. It wasn't hidden well. It wasn't encrypted or coded. It wasn't even deleted. It was simply there, glowing on my girlfriend's sync tablet, the one she forgot I still had access to. A message from someone she once described as just a friend. Someone she claimed barely spoke to her anymore. Someone she insisted was insignificant. The message wasn't explicit. It wasn't vulgar. It was worse. "Can't wait until he's out again. Let's talk about next month." Next month. Not next week. Not tomorrow. Next month. Plans. Intent. A future I wasn't in. I stared at the words until they blurred into shapes, until my chest felt too small for my lungs. Until I heard the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my skull like footsteps in an empty hall. Elara found me like that. Standing in a corner of the quiet train station, screen glowing in my shaking hand. She didn't touch me this time. She simply stood near me, close enough that her presence steadied the air around me. "What did you find?" she asked softly. I handed her the tablet. Let her read the message. Let her see the evidence of the lies I had been swallowing for months. Elara's expression didn't twist into pity. It didn't twist into anger. Instead, her eyes softened with something far gentler. A kind of mourning. Not for my relationship, but for the version of me that had been hurt without knowing. "She's been building a life where you're an accessory," Elara said slowly, handing the tablet back. "Something convenient. Something she can use to hold up her own world." My throat closed. My vision swam. Why didn't I see it? I whispered. Elara shook her head. "Because you loved her. And love makes us blind in the places where we should never compromise." A cold wind slipped through the station doors, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the distant rumble of approaching trains. People walked past us, hurrying through their own storms, unaware of the one unraveling inside mine. "Come with me," Elara said suddenly. "Not far. Just somewhere you can breathe." I followed her without speaking. Without thinking. Without resisting. Because for the first time in months, something inside me wanted to move toward warmth rather than cling to the cold. She took me to her apartment, a small place filled with soft colors, uneven stacks of books, and watercolor paintings taped gently along the hallway. Everything felt touched by her hands, her thoughts, her honesty. She brought out a blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders like a ritual. Like she was giving me permission to feel the weight of everything I had ignored. "Sit," she said gently. I did. She sat beside me, knees barely touching mine, her presence steady as moonlight. I hadn't realized how much I had missed being near someone who didn't require performance. "Talk to me," she whispered. "Or don't. Just know you're not alone." A breath escaped me, shaky, fragile, the kind that comes before quiet collapse. "I thought she loved me," I said finally. Each word felt like it had to be dragged out of my chest. Ilara didn't respond right away. She watched me with eyes that never once looked away. Eyes that didn't flinch at the brokenness in my voice. "She loved the version of you that made her shine," Ilara said softly. "Not the version that needed love back." I closed my eyes. Images of my girlfriend flickered behind them, her laugh, her touch, her eyes that once felt like home. But now all I saw were shadows. "She hated you," I whispered. "But she never really knew you." Ilara smiled sadly. "She hated the idea of me. Because she knew I was a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of what real love looks like." Her words hit me like a quiet truth I had been avoiding. Not a blow. Not an accusation. Just a light turned on in a room I had kept dark. My heart didn't wander. It didn't betray my girlfriend. It simply returned home to the place it had always recognized as safe. To the person she tried to erase. Ilara reached for my hand again, slow, gentle, and this time, I didn't tremble. I let her hold me. Let her steadiness seep into the cracks forming in my chest. "You're going back to her soon," she said softly. "I have to." "I know." But, I hesitated, breathing in the air that smelled faintly of lavender and hope. "She won't expect the person I am now." Ilara's thumb brushed lightly against my hand. "Good. Maybe it's time she saw the truth she's been hiding from." Outside her window, the rain stopped. The sky didn't brighten. But it softened. A small, quiet sign. A promise that storms eventually exhaust themselves. I looked at Ilara. The woman whose presence felt like warmth. Whose memory my girlfriend had tried to smother. Whose hand had guided me back to the truth. And I realized something that terrified the girl I left behind. My heart wasn't lost. It was home. And it remembered exactly where it belonged. She asked me 3 times that morning why I wasn't talking. The first time, her voice was small, almost tentative, as she set a plate of breakfast in front of me. Steam rose in hesitant curls, carrying a scent I recognized immediately as a recipe she once claimed she had no time to learn. I stared at the plate. Shakshuka. Her most hated dish. Mine used to be her favorite thing about Sunday mornings. "You're quiet today," she murmured, smoothing a wrinkle on the tablecloth as if erasing imperfections could erase the tension between us. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her. But because silence had become the most honest language between us. Her fingers trembled against the fabric. A barely noticeable ripple. But I saw it. The mask was beginning to slip. The second time she asked, I was in the living room, staring at the painting above the fireplace, a watercolor we bought on a rainy night 2 years ago. She had chosen the piece because it was trendy, but I picked it because the soft blues reminded me of tranquility. Now the colors looked colder. Sharper. Like the ocean before a storm. "Why won't you look at me?" she asked, her voice cracking at the edges like porcelain under pressure. I did look at her. Just not the way she wanted. She was pacing the room with restless energy, her hair pulled into a hasty ponytail, her lips glossy but smudged, evidence she had reapplied them too fast, too nervously. My gaze drifted to her hands. They were empty. Always empty around me lately. I remembered when they used to hold my face, my fingers, my shirt in moments of laughter or tears. Now they hovered, unsure whether they still had permission to touch me. "Did something happen?" she asked again, but her tone was too rehearsed, like a line she'd rewritten last minute. Her eyes searched mine, frantic, like she was looking for a script she misplaced. But I said nothing. Because sometimes silence reveals the truth louder than words ever could. The third time she asked, she grabbed my arm. Not gently. Her fingers wrapped around me like she was afraid I might disappear if she didn't anchor me to her. "Why are you acting like this?" she exploded, her breath uneven. "You're so distant." Distant. Yes. Distance is what happens when the truth cuts the string between two people, leaving them floating apart, watching each other drift. I slowly removed her hand from my arm. Her face crumpled as if I had slapped her. "You're scaring me," she whispered. But I wasn't the one she feared. She feared the version of me that had finally learned to see clearly. She feared the mirror I now held up to her. She spent the rest of the day trying to perform the love she believed I needed to see. She cooked again, dishes she only knew by name, not by heart. I found her in the kitchen surrounded by open recipe books and a mess she didn't acknowledge. She burned the garlic twice. Over-seasoned the soup. Cut her finger because she was slicing too fast, too desperately. I reached for a bandage. Instinct, maybe. Habit. But when my fingers brushed hers, she sucked in a breath, sharp, hopeful, like she expected tenderness to return instantly. It didn't. I wrapped her finger gently. But my touch no longer lingered. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with the idea of tears, watery, calculated, too glossy to be real. "Please," she whispered. Just tell me what I did." And I watched her expression shift, flicker, contort. Like she was cycling through every emotion she could imitate, hoping one would land. But counterfeit currency always reveals itself under light. I stepped back. She stepped forward. "You used to hold me," she said, clutching her injured hand. "You used to look at me like I was your world." "You were," I replied quietly. Her breath hitched. "Then what changed?" "You did." But I didn't say it yet. Instead, I let the silence expand. Let it wrap around us like invisible glass. Her panic sharpened. Later that evening, she tried crying again. This time on the couch. She curled into herself, shoulders shaking, hands covering her face just enough that I couldn't see where the actual tears fell. Her sobs echoed, loud, dramatic, echoing off the walls. But the painting above the fireplace caught my eye again. The ocean in the frame had lightning stitched into its sky, something I hadn't noticed until now. A crackle of white slicing through blue, reminding me of the truth. Storms reveal what calm seas hide. She peeked at me between her fingers. Just a glimpse. Checking to see if I was watching. I was. But not the way she wanted. She sat up abruptly and reached for me, fingers trailing up my arm, hesitant but needy. The same hands that once pushed me aside when I needed comfort. "Just talk to me," she begged, voice raw. "I can't stand you looking at me like I'm a stranger." But wasn't she? Hadn't she become one long before I realized it? Her touch burned, not with warmth, but with the weight of expectation. A demand for affection she no longer knew how to earn. I gently moved her hand away. Again. A tremor ran through her entire body. "You're avoiding me," she said. "Why? What changed? What are you hiding?" The irony nearly made me laugh. "What am I hiding?" I murmured. She blinked, confused. For the first time, genuinely confused. Because she still believed she controlled the narrative. She still believed her script had more pages. She didn't know I had already read the ending. The next morning, the sun rose weakly, a thin wash of pale gold slipping into the apartment like a timid apology. Dust floated in the beams like quiet confessions, settling on the furniture we chose together but rarely used. She approached me with trembling hands and forced enthusiasm. "I made breakfast again," she said, voice bright as fragile glass. "Your favorite. Or, one of your favorites." She set the plate down proudly, as if this was the gesture that would stitch us back together. But when she turned, her facade cracked at the edges. "Do you love me?" she asked suddenly. The words hit the air like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through every lie, every silence, every moment she had taken my devotion for granted. She stepped closer. Too close. "I need to hear it," she whispered. "Tell me you still love me. Tell me nothing's wrong." Her breath trembled against my neck. Her fingers ghosted across my jawline, hesitant but desperate. As if trying to remember a map she never truly learned. Her touch used to feel like home. Now it felt like a stranger trying to break into a place she once lived. I held her wrist, not tightly, but firmly enough to stop the trembling. "Why does it matter so much?" I asked quietly. "Why now?" Her eyes darkened. "Because you're slipping away. And that scares you." "Yes," she snapped, pulling her wrist free. "It scares me because I don't know what I did wrong." The truth hovered between us like a blade. She wasn't scared of losing me. She was scared of losing the version of herself that existed only in my affection. The woman she pretended to be. The love she pretended to give. And suddenly, painfully, I wondered how I ever mistook her performance for sincerity. How I ever believed her counterfeit love was real currency. She reached out again, slow, trembling, pleading. "Just tell me you're mine," she whispered. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't lie for her comfort. Her mask slipped completely then. Eyes wide, lips trembling, breath shallow. She realized something in that moment. Not because I said it, but because I didn't. For the first time, she understood. She no longer owned the script. And I was no longer playing the role she wrote for me. Her voice cracked into a whisper I almost didn't hear. Who did you run to?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because the truth was already reflecting in the fear widening her eyes. The truth she had always suspected. The truth that would destroy the fragile kingdom of lies she built around me. My heart had found its way back to the woman she tried so hard to erase. And as she stood there, trembling, unraveling, suffocating in the truth she could no longer outrun, I realized this was the moment her world finally began to collapse. One silent breath at a time. I didn't intend for the moment to be dramatic. But when I placed the envelope on the table, that thin, cream-colored envelope with edges still crisp from hesitation, the entire world seemed to inhale. The rain outside the window stopped all at once. As if even the sky wanted to listen. She froze. Her eyes widened the way a thief reacts when a sudden spotlight catches the outline of their guilt. What's that?" she whispered, voice trembling at the edges like wet paper. Her hand hovered above the table, suspended in fear. Like touching the envelope might unravel the reality she had carefully stitched together. I didn't sit. I didn't move closer to her. I simply watched the panic bloom across her face, spreading like ink through water. "My future," I said quietly. "And your ending." Her breath faltered. As if the sentence pierced through the last flimsy layer of denial she'd been clinging to. She stared at the envelope as if it were ticking. As if any second it might burst open and expose every lie she ever told. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say things like that." I did not respond. Because this was not about cruelty. It was about clarity. A clarity I had avoided for too long. She finally reached for the envelope, hesitant, trembling. The pads of her fingers brushed the paper lightly, almost tenderly, as if she were afraid it might burn her skin. Because it would. "That's just paperwork, right?" she asked. "Something from work? Some new contract?" Her voice rose an octave on the last word. Hope clung to it in a way that sounded desperate. "It's not work," I said. She looked up sharply. Her pupils contracted, fear tightening like a fist behind her eyes. "Then what?" Her voice cracked the way porcelain cracks, silent, then catastrophic. "You should open it," I said. The room felt smaller now. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken truth. She slid her finger under the flap, tearing the edge slowly, carefully. A ritual of someone trying to delay the inevitable. The paper inside rustled softly. A quiet sound that somehow echoed louder than any scream. She pulled it out with shaking hands. And when she read the first line, her entire body went still. Her lips parted. Her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled violently. "You." Her voice was a ghost. "You married her." Silence stretched between us. Long. Sharp. Unforgiving. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The marriage certificate rested between us like a blade. Gleaming, clean, final. Her eyes darted across the page again. As if hoping the words would rearrange themselves. As if reality could be undone by sheer disbelief. "You're lying," she whispered. "This is fake. It has to be fake. You would never. You wouldn't do something like this without telling me." "You wouldn't have listened," I replied. She flinched. The paper shook in her grasp. I still don't understand." She stared at me, eyes glassy with shock. "You went on a business trip. That's what you said." "I did travel," I said softly. "Just not for business." "You said you'd be gone 6 days." "And I was." She clutched the certificate tighter. As if holding it harder might make it less real. She looked like someone watching their reflection shatter in real time. A self-image she crafted meticulously. Splintering into fragments too sharp to gather. "You left me," she said, barely audible. "You left me to marry her." "I didn't leave you," I corrected. "You lost me." Her breath hitched again, short, panicked. Tears finally gathered, uncertain. As if even her grief was struggling to perform convincingly. "She's nothing compared to me," she snapped suddenly, the desperation sharpening. She's just someone from your past. Someone irrelevant." "Not irrelevant," I said quietly. "Not to me." Her face twisted. A mixture of anger, fear, and so. Mething like betrayal, but mirrored, distorted, misdirected. She wasn't hurt because she loved me. She was hurt because I had escaped her script. How long? She demanded. Tell me how long you've been cheating on me. I didn't cheat. Then how did this happen? She screamed, waving the certificate like a flag of war. You don't just accidentally marry someone. It wasn't an accident, I said. My voice steady. Certain. Clean. She stared at me, searching for hesitation, for cracks, for anything she could wedge herself into. But I gave her nothing. Her hands lowered slowly, the certificate dangling from her fingertips like a dying truth. You promised me forever, she whispered. No, I said, shaking my head. I promised you honesty. You just never knew what to do with it. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words evaporated before reaching her tongue. I watched her unravel. The girl who once controlled every emotion in the room. Now drowning in feelings she didn't know how to manage. She stepped closer. Her voice dropping to a plea. Tell me you didn't love her, she begged. Tell me this was revenge. Tell me this was some twisted mistake. I'll forgive you. I'll fix it. I'll be better. Her hands reached for my chest. Fingers curling into the fabric of my shirt like claws. But I gently removed her grip. Love doesn't disappear just because someone else wants it gone, I said. Her tears finally fell then. Heavy, uneven, too late. You can't do this to me, she said, voice trembling violently. You can't marry her. You can't leave me. You can't love someone else. But the truth was stronger than her denial. I already did, I whispered. Her knees buckled. She stumbled backward into the edge of the table. The certificate fluttering to the floor like a fallen verdict. She looked at it. Then at me. Then at the empty air between us. Where her illusions once lived. Why? She breathed. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even grief. It was pure, fragile confusion. Because, I said. She was the woman you insisted I forget. And you never understood what that meant. I walked past her slowly. The envelope still resting on the table like a gravestone. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared. Hollow, trembling. As the truth settled over her like winter. I reached the doorway, then paused. I didn't look back. But I let the final truth fall into the silence between us. The blade you're feeling, I said softly, isn't one I'm holding. I stepped forward. Out of the room. Out of her orbit. It's the one you carved yourself. The door clicked shut behind me. But her silence. Broken, trembling, irreversible. Followed me like a fading echo. A quiet cliffhanger. To a story she no longer had the power to write. When the door clicked shut behind me, I thought she would stay frozen. Quiet, stunned, suspended in the wreckage of a future she'd built entirely out of my devotion. But she didn't stay still. She chased after me. Her footsteps trembled down the hallway. A frantic rhythm. A percussion of unraveling lies. She grabbed my arm just before I reached the elevator. Her nails dug in slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to signal desperation. Don't walk away from me, she breathed. And for the first time since I'd known her. Her voice wasn't perfectly shaped for sympathy, sweetness, or seduction. It was raw. Unpolished. Human in the ugliest way. But not because she loved me. No. It was because she loved the life my love had built around her. She dragged me back inside the apartment. As if closing the door would reverse the truth. As if walls could contain consequences. When she let go, her hands shook uncontrollably. Not from heartbreak. But from the collapse of a throne she believed she'd earned. Her eyes darted across the room. Landing on everything I ever gave her. The painting of cherry blossoms she once claimed made her feel expensive. The polished marble vase she never filled with flowers. The soft gray couch where she staged Instagram stories of a perfect relationship she never nurtured. She wasn't grieving me. She was grieving ownership. I don't understand, she whispered. Backing away from me like emotions were stacking bricks in her path. You can't just do this. You can't just leave me for her. Her voice cracked. Not her. As if Alara were a wound she didn't want to name. You don't get to walk out after everything I... She stopped abruptly, choking on the sentence. But I knew the ending. Everything I've taken from you. Everything I built from the love you gave me. Everything I shaped myself into using the pedestal you carved beneath my feet. She wrapped her arms around herself. As if hugging the ghost of the woman she pretended to be. You promised me your life, she said, almost accusingly. I shook my head. I promised you a love you never knew how to return. Her breath hitched. Actual tears formed this time, not the glittering, performative ones. These were heavier. Messier. She looked like a painting melting in the rain. You're being cruel, she whispered. You're punishing me, why? Why now? I stepped past her, toward the window. Outside, the sky was an endless gray sheet. Clouds stretching thin like the last quiet seconds before a storm breaks. She followed me. I could feel the heat of her breath behind my shoulder. Tell me what I did wrong, she said. I looked out at the skyline, cold, distant, indifferent. You loved the world I gave you, I said softly. But not the man who gave it. She laughed. A sharp, hysterical sound. Painful in its delusion. That's not true, she snapped. I loved you. I did everything for you. No, I murmured. You did everything for the version of yourself you became when I loved you. Her expression cracked. Hairline fractures across her confidence, her entitlement, her script. The truth landed too loudly inside her chest. I could hear her breathing stumble. For the first time, I saw her without the glow of the fantasies I once projected onto her. A person addicted to being adored, not loving in return. A girl who mistook attention for affection. Status for intimacy. Possession for partnership. She was falling apart. Because my love had been the mirror that made her feel whole. And now she was staring at her reflection without it. When? She stepped closer again, voice trembling. Fingers reaching for the sleeve of my jacket. When did you stop loving me? The question hung between us like a fragile wire. A gentler version of me. The version she once shaped. Almost wanted to answer carefully. Cushion the truth. Protect her from the shards. But gentle truths never cut clean. And this one needed to. It ended, I said slowly, turning to meet her eyes. The moment I realized it never began for you. Her breath collapsed. Visibly. Audibly. The words struck her like a winter gust through an open door. Freezing everything she had built inside herself. She stumbled backward. Hitting the edge of the dining table. Her hand gripping the corner for support. She looked around the apartment again. But this time she wasn't admiring her kingdom. She was seeing a mausoleum. A place built on borrowed love. On counterfeit tenderness. On the illusion that affection could be extracted rather than offered. Her tears finally burst. Clumsy and uncontrolled. The kind that leaves your nose running. Your breath ragged. Your dignity dissolving in your palms. She had never let me see her like this. Not once in 3 years. This wasn't vulnerability. This was fear. Not of losing me. But of losing the version of herself she could only maintain by draining me empty. She slid to the floor slowly. Like her knees had forgotten how to hold her. Her back hit the cabinet behind her. And she folded into herself. Arms wrapped around her legs. Chin pressed into her knees. She cried into the hollow space between her thighs. Her shoulders shaking like a child's. Tell me how to fix it, she choked out. Tell me what to do. Tell me what you want from me. Anything, just don't leave me like this. I crouched down just enough that she could see my face when she looked up. She didn't. Her hair hid her eyes like a curtain pulled over the final act of a tragedy. What I wanted, I said softly. You never wanted to give. Her fingers clenched into fists. Her knuckles went white. A quiet, painful sound escaped her lips. Please, she whispered. Still refusing to look at me. I can't be nothing. Not after all of this. Not without you. And there it was. Her truth. Not that she loved me. But that without my love. She was no one she recognized. I stood. She reached for my pant leg with trembling fingers. Not even lifting her head. Just grabbing blindly, desperately. As if anchoring herself to me could stop the free fall inside her chest. Don't go, she pleaded. Please. I'll do anything. I'll be anyone. But that was the problem. I didn't want her to be anyone. I wanted her to be herself. And she never offered that. Only versions curated for admiration. Never truth. I gently freed my leg from her grip. She looked up finally. Her eyes were swollen, red, terrified. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rain. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. She looked stripped. Of pretense, of confidence, of the glamour she wrapped around her emptiness. For the first time in 3 years. She was truly silent. And her silence, shaking, shattered, real, was the first honest sound she'd ever made. I turned toward the door. Behind me, she inhaled sharply. A sound caught between a sob and a scream. A question trembled in her breath. Unfinished, unspoken, brittle. What happens to me now? I didn't answer. Because the truth was already unfolding inside her. She would have to meet herself for the first time. Without me. Without the pedestal. Without the borrowed glow of my devotion. And she didn't know who she was in that darkness. But I did. A collapse waiting to happen. And now, finally, the collapse had begun. The hallway outside the apartment felt like stepping out of a tomb. A place where something once pretended to live. Where love had masqueraded as devotion but left only dust and echoes behind. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Too gentle for the violence of what had ended inside. Too quiet for the collapse of a world. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the cold metal pulse with the memory of everything I had once held onto. Then I let go. The air outside hit me like a baptism. Cleaner. Sharper. Real. A wind brushed past my face, cool and unfiltered, carrying the scent of wet asphalt after a night of rain. I inhaled deeply. A full breath, an unbroken breath. A breath that didn't taste like sacrifice. It felt like surfacing after months underwater. Like finally remembering how to breathe without asking for permission. As I walked down the stairs, the city around me began to take shape. Distant traffic humming like a low orchestral note. Neighborhood lights blinking awake one by one. Early morning fog curling around street lamps like soft ghosts. For years, I thought the world I built with her was my legacy. But as I stepped into the open, I realized that legacies aren't made in rooms where love dies quietly. They're made by the people who help you remember who you are. And she, the woman crying behind that door, had spent 3 years teaching me to forget. The parking lot stretched before me, empty except for one car that waited beneath an old maple tree, its branches still dripping from the storm. The headlights were off, but the passenger window was cracked slightly, inviting the morning air inside. She saw me before I reached the car. Her silhouette shifted, her face turning toward me, eyes soft even in the dim wash of pre-dawn light. My wife. The word felt surreal, fragile in the gentlest way, like glass warmed between two palms. Not a secret, not a rebellion, not a replacement, but a truth I had returned to. I opened the door and slid into the seat. The fabric held the faint scent of vanilla and lavender. Hers, always hers. A scent that felt like the safest place on earth. She didn't speak immediately. She simply looked at me with eyes that knew exactly what silence meant. Eyes that had watched me unravel and reassemble without asking me to rush. There was no fear in them. No accusation. No need to prove anything. Just quiet understanding. "Hey," she murmured softly. Her voice didn't break the silence. It completed it. I felt something inside me loosen. The final knot of tension. The last thread of a past I no longer needed to hold. She reached out. Slowly. Gently. Her hand hovering between us. Not demanding. Not assuming. A question made of tenderness. I took her hand. And the moment our fingers intertwined, something inside me dissolved. Not painfully, but peacefully. Like dust in rain. Like pages of a story that no longer needed to be read. She squeezed my hand once. Firm enough to anchor me. Soft enough to never cage me. "Did it go the way you needed it to?" she asked. I rested my head against the seat, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "It went the way it had to." She nodded, accepting the answer without peeling it open for details. There were no interrogations. No jealous guesses. No demands for stories soaked in bitterness. Because she understood that closure doesn't always need retelling. Sometimes it just needs release. Her thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, tracing them as if memorizing the shape of the person I was becoming. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. It wasn't praise. It wasn't pity. It was truth. Gentle and honest and whole. My chest tightened. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming ache of finally being seen. Outside the windshield, the sky lightened gradually, colors shifting from charcoal to slate to the softest blue. Birds began to stir in the branches above us, their small wings shivering with life. A new morning. A new beginning. A life untouched by lies. She leaned her head slightly toward mine. Our foreheads almost touching but not quite. A distance created by reverence, not hesitation. "Do you want to talk?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." "Then we won't. We'll just sit." And so we did. The hallway outside the apartment felt like stepping out of a tomb. A place where something once pretended to live. Where love had masqueraded as devotion but left only dust and echoes behind. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Too gentle for the violence of what had ended inside. Too quiet for the collapse of a world. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the cold metal pulse with the memory of everything I had once held on to. Then I let go. The air outside hit me like a baptism. Cleaner. Sharper. Real. A wind brushed past my face, cool and unfiltered, carrying the scent of wet asphalt after a night of rain. I inhaled deeply. A full breath, an unbroken breath. A breath that didn't taste like sacrifice. It felt like surfacing after months underwater. Like finally remembering how to breathe without asking for permission. As I walked down the stairs, the city around me began to take shape. Distant traffic humming like a low orchestral note. Neighborhood lights blinking awake one by one. Early morning fog curling around street lamps like soft ghosts. For years, I thought the world I built with her was my legacy. But as I stepped into the open, I realized that legacies aren't made in rooms where love dies quietly. They're made by the people who help you remember who you are. And she, the woman crying behind that door, had spent 3 years teaching me to forget. The parking lot stretched before me, empty except for one car that waited beneath an old maple tree. Its branches still dripping from the storm. The headlights were off. But the passenger window was cracked slightly, inviting the morning air inside. She saw me before I reached the car. Her silhouette shifted. Her face turning toward me. Eyes soft even in the dim wash of pre-dawn light. My wife. The word felt surreal. Fragile in the gentlest way. Like glass warmed between two palms. Not a secret. Not a rebellion. Not a replacement. But a truth I had returned to. I opened the door and slid into the seat. The fabric held the faint scent of vanilla and lavender. Hers, always hers. A scent that felt like the safest place on earth. She didn't speak immediately. She simply looked at me with eyes that knew exactly what silence meant. Eyes that had watched me unravel and reassemble without asking me to rush. There was no fear in them. No accusation. No need to prove anything. Just quiet understanding. "Hey," she murmured softly. Her voice didn't break the silence. It completed it. I felt something inside me loosen. The final knot of tension. The last thread of a past I no longer needed to hold. She reached out. Slowly. Gently. Her hand hovering between us. Not demanding. Not assuming. A question made of tenderness. I took her hand. And the moment our fingers intertwined, something inside me dissolved. Not painfully, but peacefully. Like dust in rain. Like pages of a story that no longer needed to be read. She squeezed my hand once. Firm enough to anchor me. Soft enough to never cage me. "Did it go the way you needed it to?" she asked. I rested my head against the seat. Exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "It went the way it had to." She nodded, accepting the answer without peeling it open for details. There were no interrogations. No jealous guesses. No demands for stories soaked in bitterness. Because she understood that closure doesn't always need retelling. Sometimes it just needs release. Her thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, tracing them as if memorizing the shape of the person I was becoming. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. It wasn't praise. It wasn't pity. It was truth. Gentle and honest and whole. My chest tightened. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming ache of finally being seen. Outside the windshield, the sky lightened gradually. Colors shifting from charcoal to slate to the softest blue. Birds began to stir in the branches above us, their small wings shivering with life. A new morning. A new beginning. A life untouched by lies. She leaned her head slightly toward mine. Our foreheads almost touching but not quite. A distance created by reverence, not hesitation. "Do you want to talk?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." "Then we won't. We'll just sit." And so we did. We watched the world wake up together. The silence between us growing warmer by the minute. I thought of the apartment behind me. A mausoleum for a love that never lived. A place filled with ghosts of promises that were never real. A place where I gave everything. To someone who only knew how to take. And then I thought of her. The woman beside me. The woman I married quietly, softly. Without fanfare or audience. Not because I wanted to hide her. But because sacred things often grow best in quiet places. My ex had always feared this woman. Not because of anything she did. but because of everything she represented. A love not built on dependency, but on choice. A love not fueled by performance, but by presence. A love she could never imitate, no matter how skillful her mask became. My wife turned her head slightly, resting her cheek against the headrest, her eyes tracing my face with a tenderness that steadied me. "You're shaking," she said softly. I looked down at my hands. She was right. They trembled faintly, a slow aftershock of everything I had severed. She didn't grip me tighter. She didn't rush to soothe me. Instead, she placed her free hand over my heart and rested it there, as if reminding me it still existed. "It's over," she whispered. "You did what you needed to do." Her hand was warm, steady, alive. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth sink into me, like sunlight slowly thawing a frozen lake. "I feel strange," I admitted, "like I left a version of myself behind." "You did," she said, "and that's okay." Her honesty didn't wound me. It freed me. For years, I had lived in a love where truth was dangerous, where vulnerability became leverage, where silence filled the cracks that affection refused to mend. But with her, the woman whose hand still held mine, truth felt like a homecoming. Some stories end in revenge. Some end in destruction. Some end with the hope that the person who hurt you learns something from the ashes. But mine ended differently. Not with triumph over someone else, but with the rediscovery of myself. I turned to her fully, the morning light framing her face in soft gold. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" she smiled. "For waiting for me. For believing in me. For not asking me to be anyone but myself." She leaned in, closing the small distance between us, and pressed her forehead to mine. "You came back to me," she whispered. "That's all I ever needed." And in that moment, I understood something with devastating clarity. My ex had feared this woman, not because of who she was, but because of who she allowed me to become. A man no longer willing to be emptied. A man no longer willing to be erased. A man capable of choosing love that was real. Love she could never touch. Love she could never counterfeit. Love that would outlast every lie she ever told. I intertwined my fingers with my wife's again. A gesture small but absolute. "Let's go home," I said. She smiled. Soft, knowing, radiant. We drove away from the apartment. From the past. From the ghost of a love that never lived. And as the distance between us and that place grew, I felt it. A legacy forming quietly in the warmth of her hand. Not the story of the girl who lied, but the story of the woman who loved me enough to bring me back to myself.